So, you clicked on this video because you wanted to see how you can make every tank that you play overpowered, or at least more overpowered. Well, I'm going to give you the tips, the tools that you can use to actually apply that to all of the tanks that you're playing so that you get the best version of every tank that you play. And whilst every tank in the game isn't suddenly going to become overpowered and the most dominating ever, you can make the tank that you are playing much better every single time. So, with that out of the way, we are, of course, talking about both commander skills, we are talking about equipment, and we are also talking about delving into what the stats of the tank that you are playing are going to be so that you can maximize how much damage you're going to deal. It's been a while since we've done any of the tips videos on the channel, and I thought, let's start off with one that is actually probably the most important. So, with that out of the way, let's delve into a random vehicle. I'm just going to select a tier 8 and we will just keep scrolling and we'll pick a random one. I haven't predetermined any of them. We're going to go into what it is that we can do to actually change how that tank plays and what the benefits of that tank are. So, first one we've got the HMH AMX M449. So this is a tier 8 heavy tank from the French line that is kind of a faster heavy vehicle, so it sacrifices armor, because if we go into the armor viewer and we take a quick look at what we've got available to us, you can see its turret armor looks like it might be the strongest part of the tank, and if we delve into it, you can see it's got 200 millimeters on the actual armor. So if we delve in a little bit more, hopefully we'll be able to find those flat plates. So the main flat plate of the armor, as you can see, is this portion of the tank right here. So you're seeing that we've got flat plates, left, top, right, this bit under the bottom of it. These are like the thickest parts. These are actually pretty darn good because that's exactly what we want. We want those parts, the flattest armor, to be the strongest and the sloped armor to still be strong, but it doesn't need to be as strong because it becomes effective armor. So yeah, now we know what the armor model of this tank looks like. But that's not everything, because it also has a lower plate. Now, lower plate's typically always the weak point. You know, this big green band that you've got at the bottom of the tank, it's going to be penned by most things. You know, you're not really going to be able to deal much with this. You can't counteract it. And whilst you can angle like this, so if we look in this direction, this is going to increase this angle even further, so maybe you bounce. When you do that, you expose the side armor, where maybe people could go through the track in this direction and still pen you anyway. So whilst you do want to angle a degree, the majority of it is wiggling back and forward, trying to get someone to hit the upper plate versus the lower plate, and that's where you actually bounce the rounds. It's not from making this super strong or anything like that. You've also got a bit of spaced armor with this tank, so you can use that to your advantage. But predominantly, this tank doesn't have a huge amount of armor. It's got a big cupola on the top of the vehicle. It's going to get penned a lot. Trust me, when you're coming up against these things or playing them, you're going to get penned in the cupola or pen it in the cupola very easily. It is very thin. And even if we look, 150 millimeters of armor, even tier 6s that you're playing against will be able to pen you through your cupola. So armor-wise, not particularly the greatest in the world. But how do we make up for that? What happens if you pick a heavy tank that, whilst it doesn't have super heavy armor like a Mao's, you know, where you can bounce rounds reliably just by having the armor itself and you don't necessarily have to do anything about it, how can we make this heavy tank a little bit different? How can we use it to the best of our abilities to deal more damage or have more of an impact in our games? Well, that's where all of the crew skills and equipment come in, where you have to know why the tank plays like it does. This is one of the most important things about determining what you're going to do to the tank itself. That's why we went into the armor, because if we have a look at a tank and have a generalization of, oh, I'm just going to use all of this equipment on every tank that I'm playing, you're going to end up with a generalized, yeah, it might boost up your performance of a vehicle, but it's not specific to the tank that you're playing, and so it's probably not going to be the most optimal to that tank. But in order for you to determine what is the most optimal, we need to look at these things when we decide what we're doing to our tanks. And so that's the information I'm trying to showcase off to you today. It is not a simple thing. It takes a while to get used to and to figure out what you should do to tanks to make them better. And that is exactly the thing that is going to help you out when it comes to gameplay, how you can play the tank, as well as actually the equipment that you're choosing on the tank to make it even better at what it's good at, and negate some of the side effects that come from playing a certain vehicle class or type that you're playing. So, the HMH, we know it's fast, but what should we do to the tank to make it a little bit better? Well, let's take a look at also its DPM if we go in, because if the DPM is pretty decent for a heavy tank, which 2000 DPM is not bad, but bear in mind we have got some of the equipment on it already. The gun rammer, we got the ventilation, it's all boosting up our damage per minute, which is going to allow us to reload faster and put more rounds down range, get more damage, etc. in a minute. That is basically all it is. And so that is kind of like the top number that you can typically expect when you're playing a tank. Now we have a commander to put in, so it's going to go up a little bit, but it'll be predominantly around 2200-ish is what we're going to be looking at for the tank, which is not exceptional, but it's not bad. It's actually in that region where it's usable. It's perfectly fine. So if we were to take a very low base damage per minute number that you might have on certain vehicles, say you've got 1500 on a heavy tank, is it worth buffing the damage per minute of that vehicle up if you might be able to buff something else about the tank that is going to allow you to get more damage? So, for example, super heavies typically have less DPM because of the fact that they are slow and heavy and they have armor, and typically if you got more armor you sacrifice damage or you sacrifice mobility, and so you're going to end up with less damage per minute. But let's think about it in a logical standpoint, is we are already fast. So we do not need any more speed. We do 40 kilometers an hour. We have a power to weight ratio and the top here of 14.29. So that is perfectly fine. No issues in that regard. You know, you're going to be able to get up to top speed okay. It's not exceptional, but it's far better than a lot of the super heavies that you see in the game. We also have 1500 hit points. It is on the lower side, so that will play in as a factor in a minute. But we also have decent view range, 385 on a heavy, with the way that we got it set up right now, with no boost to the actual view range of the tank at base. 385 is decent, and for a tier 8 heavy, the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves playing in a slightly more vulnerable tank is to make sure that whatever is firing at us is going to be spotted. So for me, when we look at a tank like this, we have boosted up its accuracy, so we make sure that that lower DPM than what you get on a medium will be accounted for with better accuracy. So we trade off some of the other equipment slots to make sure that we're hitting every single round, which is why we use a stabilizer. So we can get our accuracy down to 0.33, which is very good for a heavy tank. So we utilize the fact that we already have good accuracy to make it even better, so we're not missing any shots, meaning that our effective damage per minute, which it doesn't show you here, but what I'm saying is it's kind of like a made up term for if you have 10,000 DPM, but for example, you have the worst accuracy in the game, all your rounds are going off like 90 degrees to where you're aiming. Well, technically you do have 10,000 DPM, but you actually never hit all of them all in one go, and therefore the actual effective value, like the one that is realistic, is going to be much, much lower. You know, it might only be 1,000 or something. Whereas when we look at a tank like this, we can make sure that that 2,000 damage per minute is going to be almost effective, like 100%. That is what we want. We want every round to be fired as soon as we reload and to pen and not to miss. That is like the ultimate goal. Now, that is never going to happen, but maybe we can get it up to like 80% because we've got good accuracy. We have a decent reload where it's not too long, 9.4 seconds on this one, which is that nice range where it's not too long, where people get back behind cover when you find them and you take the first shot, and then by 9 seconds you're reloaded again to fire off the second shot, and then they get behind cover after that. So we can maybe get off 2 shots for every time that we find an opponent, and they maybe get a shot off on us or whatever. And so that is kind of what we're after with a tank like this. It doesn't have the best mobility, it doesn't have the best camo, it doesn't have the best armor, but it does have good mobility. It's like decent. It also has, you know, decent armor. It also has a pretty darn good main armament, 320 damage, good penetration values on the standard and the premium, and then we've got good view range for a heavy tank. It's relatively decent. And so what do? We boost up the decent things about the tank and try and think about some of the negatives which may be impacted by some of the equipment and commander skills to stop some of the situations arising. So the reason why we've gone with rapid loading is to give us more DPM. The more DPM we have, because we've got more effective DPM than some of the tanks in the game, therefore boosting our DPM is going to be more important, because that means if we boost up our DPM, that added DPM that we get is going to be more effective than, say, you're playing something like a KV2. If you add DPM to a KV2, you're probably still going to miss anyway. So is it going to make it any more usable? Like, is it going to give you as much of a benefit by adding in the gun rammer? Now, that might be the case, but the point is that because we can buff up our DPM, that's going to be effective, and so it's the best one to choose. Then we've got improved ventilation. Now, this is something that you don't have to choose, and in fact, it's something that is going to boost up loads of factors about your tank. It's kind of like the all-rounder, and for an all-rounder tank like this one, I actually think it is a good choice. It buffs up our view range, it buffs up our DPM, it buffs up how fast we repair our tracks, it buffs up, you know, the chance of, I don't know, dealing. Basically, it buffs up loads of different aspects of the tank. And so when we've got an all-rounder tank like this, Vents is actually a decent one because it's given us lots of benefits in all of the areas where they're decent. Vents is not so good when you have a tank that has one really good thing and then like 5 really bad things, because percentage-wise, if you increase something that's really bad by a small amount, say it's only 10, it's only going to go up by 0.5 or 0.05 if it's 5%. So it only goes up by a small amount, whereas if we have 100, it will go up by 5, so you get a bigger bonus to the actual number or the stat that you're boosting. So ideally, we want our baseline to be quite steady, like decent across the board. Vents is going to buff up all of those decent stats even further up. Whereas if you've got one that's really high, one that's really low, it's going to boost up that one that's really high. But if you wanted to maximize it, you might as well go with something that is just purely boosting that one really decent thing about a tank, rather than like all of the really crappy ones and then that one really good one. So that's kind of what we're after when we look at something like ventilation. And then stabilizer. This is just improving our accuracy. As I said, if we are using a tank that has effective DPM, so it's very accurate to begin with, it has good DPM, then stabilizer really does help that out, because now we're able to consistently have laser-like accuracy, which is going to be very, very good for those close quarters engagements, even long distance engagements, allowing this heavy tank to be played not only as a brawling heavy tank, but also as a medium to long range heavy tank as well. In those scenarios where maybe you spot a light tank that's 400 meters away on the move, you can hit it quite reliably with the accuracy that we've got, because gun stabilizer stops our accuracy bloom, so how big the circle gets when you're moving. And so if we can reduce that size down by 20%, which is basically what's happening, you don't have to wait as long for it to actually aim in fully, and that way we can fire off our shot quicker, which means maybe the tank didn't get behind cover, whereas if we wanted to fully aim with another tank that didn't have stabilizers, maybe it wouldn't have fully aimed and the person's gone behind cover and you've missed a shot. So that is kind of the gist of what those do. Now, the fourth equipment slot, which is obviously new with the latest updates to the game, as of the recording of this video. If you're watching later down the line, we used to have 3, now we've got 4. Coated optics is the other thing that this tank is going to benefit from, at least in my opinion. Now, there are no wrong or right answers when it comes to setting up your tanks. There are better ones and there are slightly worse ones, but anything that you do is going to boost something, and so it's better than not having anything. But at the same time, when we're looking at a tank like this, ideally, because we don't have the most armor, because we don't have the most, speed, because we are relatively big, the size of the tank is quite big, we want to make sure that when someone fires at us, we spot them, because that means that we, A, know where they are, and so we can reposition ourselves to change where we are. because the armor might not work in wherever the person is, so we know that they're there, and then we can move and change our position to suit, and so we may avoid that potential damage. And avoidance of damage is really strong on tanks that don't have necessarily the biggest amount of armor, the most effective armor, because, you know, when you get hit, you get penned. In tanks like this one, for example, on the most part, they can bounce, which is what we're aiming to do, but if they get hit a lot, we're going to be penned. So if we can stop that by spotting the opponents that are firing at us, or simply getting assistance damage, which is going to help with your overall numbers, maybe you spot someone, that is what Coated Optics is going to do. So let's make sure that we've got it in the 4th equipment slot before I purchase it. And there we go. So our view range is now going to go up to 424 meters. This is very good for a heavy tank. Like, you are nearly at the max cap of view range that you can have on a tank, which is 445 meters, I think, off the top of my head. It's either 440 or 445. I think it's 445. That is the range at which whatever you have over that, it doesn't actually spot anyone further away. That is the maximum distance that you can spot someone in the game. That's how it works. But HMH, if we now look at the commander skills, this is where it gets interesting. This is probably where you need to start thinking about what is the best for the tank that I'm playing. Now, as a general rule, the first one that I go for is Born Leader on any crew. That's because it gives us 5% to skill effectiveness and also 5% to crew performance. So it's essentially like having vents on your commander. And with a tank like this, it's even more important because, as I said, it's a decent at everything, so it's going to make everything better. And so that's really, really nice. And Born Leader, really going to be helpful for this tank. Then we move into Run and Gun. Accuracy when moving. So accuracy, as I said, going to help us get effective damage per minute and make our tank even more accurate. So with vertical stabilizers and Run and Gun, we're going to be able to essentially have really good accuracy whilst we're moving, allowing us to hit shots on the move, allowing us to stop and not be as inaccurate. So say we're moving and we stop, we're not going to have to wait as long for the aiming circle to come in. And that way we can be more accurate all of the time, basically. So it's really nice. It doesn't improve accuracy when you're stationary, obviously, because that's just going to be whatever it is when it's stationary, when fully zoomed in. But a lot of the time you aren't stationary, you are moving slightly, you are always kind of moving slightly forward, and then you stop and then you aim in. Like, it's just going to make our accuracy better overall. Camo expertise, obviously not needed on a heavy, but for this one, because it's kind of like it is more so a heavy than a medium, but it also is kind of a medium hybrid. So it kind of plays like a heavy, but it also has some aspects of a medium with regards to the damage you're dealing, 320, the accuracy, and the view range is actually pretty decent as well. So having camo can help you avoid being spotted and so avoid the damage that we're taking. So you can see here we've got 404 meters of still concealment on our tank, which means that we can avoid some of the damage coming in by just simply not getting spotted by other people. It isn't going to be crazy, and on a heavy tank, it's not so good. But when it comes to, like, it might save you a couple times in a game where maybe you would have got spotted, or maybe you can get off a shot first before someone spots you because you spotted them. Maybe another heavy tank or something like that. It does become useful, and on a tank like this, I think is perfectly fine to have. Then we come into situational awareness. We've already said about view range. Having extra view range is going to help us spot people and avoid damage because we want to be able to know where they are so we can move back down hills, avoid the damage, get behind cover to avoid damage rather than blocking damage with a tank like this. And so situational awareness is going to help us do that even more, boosting our view range above max to 465 meters. Then we've got Comms Expert. Now this is from my light tank crew, so I would not be using this one because it increases the chance, the time that someone's spotted by it by 3 seconds. Now on a heavy tank, it's not necessary at all, but there are a few others that are. Now Snapshot. Obviously we talked about accuracy, and accuracy is big, so Snapshot is going to be a nice one. This tank is a turreted tank, so the snapshot perk or skill only works on tanks that have a turret, obviously, turret duration, rotation. So we want to have that. So snapshot goes straight on. More accuracy, more effective DPM, less chance for us to miss and get screwed by RNG. Perfect, that's what we want. Then we move in and we think, okay, so we're playing a heavy tank, we're quite slow, and we don't have the best power to weight ratio, and our terrain resistances, which are essentially found in the tank stat panel, hopefully we can get there. Let's have a look. Are 2.35, 1.69, 1.5. So these are going to be worse than a medium tank. They're going to be worse than a light tank on average. So they're not going to be great, which means when you get onto those types of terrain, you're going to be slower, sluggish to turn, to move, to get up to top speed. And so boosting our terrain resistances is going to help this tank maintain more speed and use the speed that we've currently got on the tank of 40 kilometers an hour to get there up to that speed faster and to maintain that speed on the different terrain types. So off-road driving gives us exactly that. So on medium and soft terrain, the ones that are affecting your speed the most, it gives us a boost of 7.5%, which is very noticeable. And so this is definitely going on this tank. We can maintain our speed better, we're going to maneuver better, we're going to be able to turn and wiggle and avoid damage a little bit better. It's just a generally very, very good one to have. Similarly, you can put on clutch braking, which is going to help us turn, which can be useful against light tanks. But to be honest, if you have got yourself in a situation where a light tank is going around you, it's usually curtains anyway, or the end of the game. And so having more speed to turn your vehicle's hull isn't so noticeable. It does come in handy if you're in battles, close combat, and you want to wiggle slightly faster, so people have less of a knowledge, so you're kind of like ducking and weaving out of all of the shots or whatever. It can be useful, but for me, there are better perks, especially for a tank like this. And because the tank already has an okay amount of traverse speed, we don't need a huge amount more. Like, we're not going to be limited by the fact we can't turn. Whereas the Maus, for example, are super heavy. The Type 5 might be. So getting the extra turning speed would actually be useful. This one is not really needing it, to be honest. Now, other things. I mentioned we don't have the most health with this vehicle. 1500. It is like, it's okay, but you know, if we can improve the amount of health that we have on a vehicle, the more shots we can take, maybe we take an extra shot of damage if we improve the health of the vehicle to have more. So, how can we do that? Well, you can't. You can't improve the amount of health that you have on your vehicle, but what you can do is reduce the damage that you're receiving with armor angling. And so for pretty much every tank in the game, I take this now because we've got more crew skill slots anyway, because Sixth Sense is gone and it just reduces how much damage you're taking by 5%, so why not? But at the same time, what we're doing here is, yeah, it might not be a huge amount more health that you've effectively got in the game because it's only 5%. What it might mean is, say you've got 800 health and a person does 200 damage per shot. Now that means you can take 4 damaging hits before you're taken out. So that 4th damaging hit is going to take you out. Whereas if we've got 5% more health, that 800 health is going to go up to 840, which means that if someone has 200 damage, they can get 4 shots in and that leaves you on 40 health. And because you now have an extra bit of health, even if it's small, it means it gets you over that stopgap whereby the amount of damage that normal people are going to be dealing means that you actually end up getting an extra shot that you can take, even if it is only a minuscule amount of health left, which is very, very beneficial because that means maybe we get an extra shot back at them. And so you get more damage, you get more effect in the game. Maybe you could run away and you could survive the rest of the game as opposed to being instantly taken out. So that is one of the reasons why having armor angling in the game is really useful. I do think that Wargaming need to change this to be 5% increased health because it's unfair that the other person has to guess whether or not you've got armor angling on your tank. You have no idea if someone does. It's really unfair, and essentially you might think that you're dealing 400 damage, but actually your average damage to that person would be 380 damage. And so if they're on 390 health, you typically think, oh, I can one-shot that guy, but actually your average roll, you would have to high roll to be able to take them out. tangential to the video, but Wargaming definitely need to change this to actually just increase the health of your vehicle by 5% instead. But the point still lands. This is very, very crucial for the heavy tank. Now, then we come into the realms of like, we've got kind of the main ones. Like, what do we pick now? It's kind of a bit of a toss-up between what could be useful. We come out of the realms of like everything is like very useful to some of them are going to be quite situational. And so when you get towards the end of having your commander skills, like the 8th and 9th slot that you have, it becomes more situational to the tank that you have. So like the first 7 can generally be around about the same for most heavy tanks in the game. But then the 8th and 9th one are going to be the ones where you need to think a bit more about the tank you're playing. So with this, obviously we mentioned clutch braking. That's not really going to benefit this tank a huge amount. Like, we don't need it, to be honest. So what do? Well, rollover recovery, not going to do anything. Expert gunner, this is going to increase the chance of damaging enemy crew and modules by 6% with non-HE shells. We don't really fire HE, so every single one of our rounds would be having 6% increased chance of damaging module and crew, which might mean that they get ammo racked. It might mean that you take out their engine. It might mean that you set them on fire, so you can get RNG moments built in. It isn't RNG if you're increasing your chances. It just means, well, it is RNG that you set someone on fire in that game. You can't deterministically know that you'll set someone on fire, but you can deterministically mean that out of 100 tanks, you will set 6 more people on fire. If you set 100 people on fire, you'll set 106 with this on, basically. Essentially, that's kind of how it works. So that is a nice boost, but it's not the biggest thing. 25% decrease to the effect that distance has on shell penetration ability. So this comes down to looking at, for example, the rounds that we've got. Now, APCR, as a general rule, is affected by penetration drop-off. Let's try and find a tank with heat. I have no idea if the Somua has heat. Hopefully, the Revelarize, I think, has heat. So heat, not affected by damage drop-off, like penetration drop-off over range. So you can fire at 100 meters and it will have the same pen as if you fire at 500 meters. So that would not do anything for us on the Revelarize, whereas we're playing the HMH and we've got APCR. However, when we look at the actual penetration drop-off, it's not very big. It goes from 271 to 261. If it was 271 to 220, I might think, oh, okay, that is quite a substantial amount. We're going to have much less pen on our premium rounds. That might not be such a good thing. The same thing can be said with AP rounds. So this actually does have a decent drop off, 232 to 205, and it varies as you go further away from like 100. So it will be somewhere in that range. If it's 200 meters away, it might be 225 millimeters of penetration on average. So close quarters brawling with AP is what you want, and then APCR from longer distances is going to help, but it is still affected. So when we come to our commander skills, that is where the expert gunner can come in useful on tanks that have very, very slow rounds, or rounds that essentially are going to be badly affected. So AP rounds, premium AP, that sort of thing. That's what we're after. But for this one, probably not going to be the most useful. We've then got Final Stand, which is that if we're under 10% of our hit points, we're going to get 25% increase to crew performance, which means your reload goes up by 25%, your view range goes up by 25%, your track repair speed goes up by 25%. Basically, everything regarding the crew goes up by 25%. Very, very big. But, of course, it's very situational, only when you're under 10% HP. Your gun reload speed also is buffed by 15%, which is massive. It's a massive buff. That's double what a gun rammer does on your tank. But it is only when you're on 10% HP. So, is that useful for the most part? Well, kind of. It is very useful, but it does require you to be in a very specific situation of under 10% HP. And so you basically have to be on 150 HP with this tank or less. That is what we're after. It would actually have to be 149 if it's under 10% HP. So 149 hit points on the vehicle, which how many times are you going to be on that? Probably not that many. But then looking at some of the other perks and equipment, we've got dynamic driving. That's for full damage and ramming damage. We're not really going to be ramming anyone. And then probably people aren't going to ram us because we're in a heavy tank, so they're not necessarily going to ram us, so the opportunity of that one's probably going to be low. We've got green thumb, which is 10% increase to the vehicle's camo when in bushes, basically. We're not really going to be sitting in bushes, so is that going to be useful? And then we've got radio jamming. Decreases the time spotted by enemies by 3 seconds. Well, we're going to get spotted every game. 100%. We're going to be spotted every game. So when I look at tanks, I typically think, right, okay, what is really bad about a tank, or what is really good about a tank? Okay, we can buff the really good thing even higher. We can stop some of the really negative things slightly using equipment, and we can do things that are going to really help out everything about our tank. Every game, we want the things that are going to guarantee that we have a better tank every single game that we're playing, because if you can have a really good game because you had a really lucky, very small thing where you had the opportunity to get final stand to proc because you were on 120 damage or health left. Of course, that is at nearer the end of the game after you've already been pretty much taken out and the game is probably coming to a close anyway, so it's not going to affect the whole game, and that game is going to be 1 in every 10 maybe that actually happens. So it's going to be very limited. So it limits it, and then it limits it even more because you're probably already quite a decent way through that game that you're using final stand on. Radio jamming, going to work from the very beginning. It decreases our chance of being spotted by 3 seconds. So this one is almost a must. But as I said, we have a signal, a comms expert, which we don't need on this tank. So we actually have 1 extra crew slot that we would use on this tank. Now, we're playing a heavy tank and that doesn't have that much armor, and that is going to be in some situations that are pretty bad for the tank if we get tracked. So, ideally, we want to repair our tracks faster to avoid the damage and be able to maneuver around as fast as possible. So, general mechanic is going to boost our repair speed by 10%. So, it's a nice quality of life thing. Most games you'll probably end up getting tracked. Ideally, you don't want to be tracked out in the open. 10% isn't the most amount, to be honest. It's not a huge amount, but that's of all damage modules as well. So say you get your view range, your viewfinder knocked out or whatever, it's going to repair slightly faster. But obviously track mechanic, the one that we actually really want, 25%. That is probably the biggest one for this tank, and I would 100% respec our skill to actually swap that one out. That is what I am going to do with this tank. Now, that is basically my thought process when looking at a random tank and thinking about what we need. That is what you have to think about when you decide to play a tank. And whilst this video has taken a little bit of time, when you get used to it, I do this in like maybe 2 minutes, 1 minute or something like that. It doesn't take a huge amount of time after you've had practice and experience. And once you can kind of get the gist of what a tank is, like for example, this is going to be similar to the AMX 65T. They're basically going to be the same sort of tank. So there are some nuances, but we need to look into those. But at the same time, they're going to be pretty darn similar. Whereas like, I don't know, let's find some other one. The HMH 58 is going to be relatively similar to the Batchat 12T. They're both autoloaders, they're both light tanks, they're going to have a similar sort of playstyle, so, and there's lots of autoloading light tanks out there, so they're all going to be fairly similar. They have nuances to each one, but you'll be able to get a gist of what you need to do with not just the tank that you're playing, but also similar tanks as well that you're playing. So I thought it was a useful video, and really, I apologize that there's no gameplay to this video, but it's important that you understand the ways in which players that have experience and, you see content creators who are having amazing games or whatever. This is the things that they do just in the background and what they're thinking about that you can use yourself to be able to fast track how fast you're getting better at the game, as well as, having a tank that is going to perform better in your games as well. And because you've checked out how the tank actually plays and stuff like that, you're going to be able to know more about what you're going to use that tank and the roles that you need to use it in the game that you're going to be playing in that tank, because you now know, okay, it doesn't have that much armor, so I need to kind of avoid shells. I boosted up my view range, so I want to make sure that I'm utilizing that. Can I get to a position where I can maybe spot people whilst also getting into cover very quickly? And it's all of that that combines into one when you come to put stuff in your vehicle. It's not just random. You shouldn't really just blanket put in whatever equipment, whatever crew skills, and just use the same crew for everything. You can generally like use a similar crew for types of tanks, like heavy tanks, for example. Like I have a crew for super heavy tanks, I have a crew for fast, like medium heavy tank hybrid things, I've got a crew for medium tanks, I've got a crew for light tanks, and then maybe I change them up if the tank itself is quite different. But the idea being is that you need to be looking at those last couple of commander skills that are a bit more situational to the tank you're playing in, and checking out the equipment, specifically the most important thing, the equipment for how that tank is going to play, and picking out the key points of those tanks. And that is what is going to make your tanks more overpowered than, say, someone else who didn't take the time to actually think about it. And hopefully that becomes helpful to you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed it. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next one. Subscribe for more, and let me know if you like these types of videos, as we've got plenty more things that we could talk about, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.